And we are live. Good afternoon and welcome yet again to another one of our live hangouts. 4 o'clock sharp. This time the technology did not fail us. The reason for having this particular session, it ties in with one of our core principles, which is the whole idea about freedom of speech. And of course, the issue in terms of freedom of speech is that freedom of speech is something that we view as something that's quite absolute. So either you have it or you don't. And it's your ability to be able to speak to people on subjects that you want to speak to them about and to speak to whoever you want to speak to. Now, that's been core to our value proposition, if you wish, from day one, in terms of what we stand for as a political party. And we've been very upfront about that. One of the things that we took a lot of flack for over the recent period from a number of people who are not aware necessarily of the way in which we approach free speech was that one of our candidates, Roman, who is with us on the broadcast, happened to be on a podcast where he was interviewed by a bunch of people who we find extremely dislikable. In fact, they're racist. Let's be upfront about it. They see themselves as white supremacists, and they have a very disdainful view of most of us who happen to live in this country. But Roman, along with a DA person who I will not name because we're certainly not giving them free publicity at this point, happened to go onto that show with a view to engaging with these guys, which is something that we end up doing all the time. We talk to people who have views that are different from ours. And we do this for a number of reasons. Certainly from my side, I talk to people whose views I find disreputable to try and win them over to my side. And I think that at the same time, there's the real possibility that they are speaking to us to try and win us over onto their side. Of course, it's unlikely that they are going to win me over to their side, given that their starting position is that I'm an inferior human being. But in any case, we do try. So we want to have a free and frank conversation around this. And I'd like to now open up the floor to my colleagues so that we can kind of go around and just put in perspective when we talk about freedom of speech, what exactly we mean.
Well, if I may start...
Sure, okay, Roman, go for it.
Sorry, thank you, Duncan. If I may start, pertaining to the actual debate, I don't personally think there are white supremacists for the main reason that one is a colored nationalist and the other one is a Hindu nationalist, i.e. therefore not white. And then I was on the stream with Mr. Willem Petzer, who calls himself a paleo-libertarian, but I would argue is more of a Afrikaner nationalist in terms of his arguments. And then the host of the debate, Carp Londer, I'm not too sure what he looks like at all because he doesn't show his face, but his arguments were more of a socially conservative, balkanized South Africa sort of arguments rather than a superiority of one's race. So I think it's very important just to define that the opponents were not, in the classical sense, white supremacists because most of them were not white. They were sort of nationalists for their own kind rather than whites in particular.
Fair comment, yes.
Duncan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to play devil's advocate to some extent in this video, so please excuse me. I'm not having a go at you at all, Ramon, but I'm going to say a few things which are really meant in the spirit of debate and open discourse. I think the first thing I want to say is watching that video, especially with seeing the old South African flags, the avatars of some of the people who were on that podcast, made me feel quite uncomfortable. While we as a party are in favor of unfettered freedom of speech, and I absolutely support that principle, I don't necessarily think it does us any favors to share a platform with the far right, with people who use the old South African flag or identify with it. I know for a fact, Ramon, that you do not identify with the people you were talking to, but I do worry that sharing a platform with them wasn't necessarily the right thing to do.
All right, well, if I may respond to that. Well, it's very simple. So I have been on numerous platforms since having the Renegade Report come into existence. The Renegade Report is a free speech podcast. We speak to anyone on any side of the spectrum. We invite them on, we chat, and we make sure that we sort of understand each other's position. The particular channel who invited me on, Carp Blunder, has 10,000 subscribers, mostly based in South Africa. And, excuse me, these people, when reading through the comments during the course of the debate, these people are people that think that the democratic, dream of South Africa has failed, and what needs to be done is to retreat into their own, let's say, their own civic nationalist bubbles in a way, and not engage with anyone outside of that bubble. Would it
be unfair to refer to that as a lager?
No, perhaps not. I think that's quite fair. So my intention in going onto that channel was to say that, the things that you want for your people, in quotation marks, could be applied universally across South Africa, across all races and across all cultures, because essentially we all want the same thing. By retreating from the democratic space, you're not doing yourself any favors whatsoever. So that was the importance of me going on to that channel in the first place. I do realize he had an all South African flag on his channel, but if you understand internet culture, especially 4chan culture, where this sort of thing is pervasive, it's more of a trolling exercise rather than an identification with apartheid.
All right. I suspect a lot of people that I've spoken to don't necessarily, or they don't. I know they don't spend time on 4chan. I don't spend time on 4chan, but I just worry about the optics of it. I think I know, Nati, you want to jump in here, but let me just say, I think Ivo Vechter put it quite well in his column on the Daily Maverick this morning, and I'm quoting here. He said, "A mere discussion does not constitute endorsement, and it is better to engage extremists on all persuasions openly than to suppress them, but it raises concerns." And I think therein perhaps lies the issue. It's about the optics of it, and it potentially gives our critics a hammer to knock us over the head with.
For me, the principle of that Paper Cow has chosen, that we are for absolute freedom of expression. There's absolutely no reason for me to see why to say that Roman was not supposed to speak to any other groups of people. And I, just as a person in my daily life and everything that I do, I prefer reaching out to people than putting a wall between myself and people. So, I mean, how else are you supposed to change other people's views? You cannot engage with them. So, to say that, okay, sure, we are a party that we would need people to vote for us. But to say that, no, you cannot associate with this one or that one, that makes me feel uncomfortable. Unless we are saying as a party, then that we're not really for absolute freedom of speech, of expression. And I see no reason why I shouldn't speak to any other person. I see no reason why one of our members shouldn't reach out, if I may put it that way. You'll find that in those groups in those grouping, whether it's people call them white supremacists or whatever they call them, you'll find that there are people, even they, who feel differently about certain things that are mainly people talk about. But so how else are we supposed to change those minds and to win them over to our side if we are not supposed to engage with them? And I would like to think of myself as a free-minded person, and I would like to think that our party stands for that. And if we really think about it as a party, there are people who want to see us not even speaking, because they have already put a label on us that we stand for right wings and all those things. But for me, those people just don't want us to say anything, and to then come being told that, oh no, you can't speak to those ones. And I would like to think that as a free-minded person, I should be free to do exactly what I want, as long as I'm not harming any other person with my speech.
Yeah, very well said, Renati. I cannot agree with you anymore. I think you hit the nail on the head. But just let me just answer Duncan quickly. Duncan, as for optics, I'm very worried about that word optics. Having a debate with someone on a platform is about the ideas discussed. When BLF, which is, I would consider, a hate group, they go on ENCA, no one accuses ENCA of the optics. No one accuses SABC News of optics. They say BLF are coming onto the platform so we can debate the ideas that they are professing to have. So I'm not too sure why there's a distinct difference between a national news service and a YouTube channel that is open to the world. It was, no one found this video. I said, I'm on this platform, I'm on this show. There it is on YouTube. No one dug this out of some dark web thing. So optics, to me, is a bit of a red herring in all this.
Yeah, I'd like to come in on the question of optics, because it's something that people bring up constantly. If, for example, people say to us, if only you were not making the point about people having the right to carry firearms, we'd feel far more comfortable with what you are doing. And it's very important for people to actually understand that, unlike the other parties, we start on the basis of the principles that we hold true to. And the principles then inform the way in which we act on a day-to-day basis. And immediately at the point at which we start being concerned about the optics of any decision that we take, that immediately is putting a brake on the very principled approach that we've had up until now. Someone has raised the point right now in the comments. I think it was David Fourie says, as an MP, it would literally be your job to discuss issues with people who disagree with you. And he's absolutely correct. When we get to Parliament, the whole idea is that we will ultimately need to negotiate with people that I find personally disreputable, on the assumption that the BLF gets into Parliament. You might remember that at the taking of the swearing of the Electoral Code of Conduct, when Andile was sitting right next to me, and he physically attempted to manhandle me. And so the entire point around having to deal with people who are disreputable, it cuts across every single field on a day-to-day basis. And what we are basically saying as the party, by espousing the principle first, is that you need to understand our principles, and the principles then inform our action. And concern about the optics needs to be informed by whether the act of simply associating with someone who's disreputable is in any way affecting our principles. Now, what I've said with regard to the old South African flag, which has been raised many a time, the old South African flag, for me, whenever I see it, my reaction is to laugh. And I look at people who are waving the South African flag, and I say, the old South African flag, and I say, guys, you lost and we won. So that's cool. I can live with this. And people also forget that when Nelson Mandela was sworn in as president of a free and democratic South Africa, he took his oath of office under that old South African flag. The old South African flag was only replaced many months after Parliament actually convened for the first time. So it's a critical part of our history. And the idea that we find something offensive 25 years after the fact, when in fact the person who I would argue is the greatest that our nation has ever produced, had no issues with standing under that flag and taking it over. It seems to me to be a bit disingenuous. And it really is people trying to rewrite history to some extent. We're going to be in Parliament, and we're going to have to be talking with disreputable people, and we're going to have to win them over to our point of view, because we are going to be tabling these things that we want to achieve in Parliament. And the difficult way for us to achieve that is to constantly agitate and take people to court until we've got it done. Or the other way is to actually persuade people that, look, it'll be a lot easier for us if you pass these laws immediately so that we can put these real changes in place, and then get on with whatever else you guys want to fight about. And that actually requires that we be having these conversations. So, for my part, I've received an invitation from Mr. Petzer for a conversation sometime over the next period, and I intend taking him up on that, even though we have very dissimilar views on a number of things, because he has an audience that I'd like to actually reach with an understanding of what our principles are, and to tell them why, actually, in a free and democratic South Africa, establishing a position of principles that unites all of us as South Africans is far more important than having a scenario where we are putting ourselves into these little lagers. And I think that we need to take every single opportunity that Roman, in terms of your podcast, I certainly saw nothing at any point where there was even a endorsement by omission of any of their viewpoints. So, although if you do agree with their viewpoints at any level, I'd like feel free to share it with us.
Well, there was no endorsement unless you selectively edit the video, as some have done. But no, there was no. So I disagree with the claim, and then I offer an alternative based on individual human rights and universal application thereof, which is what I do in every single interview. So if I do it to someone who's right-wing or someone to left-wing, the principles remain the same throughout.
I can't see the questions coming in, Canton. Is there a button I need to press in Hangouts?
So
Duncan, you won't see the questions on Hangouts. You need to have a separate window open to see that. But let me just go through a couple of the comments that we've got so far. We have someone wants to know thoughts on a study by UJ showing ANC Ramaphosa approval. No, we'll talk about that on some other time. Freedom of the press versus freedom of speech. On a City Press poster this weekend, a story headline read, "White cancer hits blacks." How do you respond to such a headline? Anyone want to pick that up?
I didn't know cancer discriminated in that way.
The headline says, "White cancer hits blacks."
I suppose
it's the newspaper. It's a newspaper's choice. If people are free to read it or not to read it, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess the whole idea of them putting out, I would assume just based from the headline that this is a particular form of cancer that up until now has predominantly affected Caucasians and now is suddenly affecting other race groups. And in order to do I would say a scurrilous spin on the thing, that's what City Press has ended up doing. But, do we support the right for City Press to go out and do that? Certainly, absolutely. Ties in with our principles. Should they get a smackdown from their readership for actually trying to spread fake news? I think yes.
Well, at the end of the day, it's up to the consumers of the news to decide if they want to read that, if that headline catches their attention or not. And I'm one of those people who, I don't remember the last time I bought, I went to buy a City Press or a Sunday Times or the main weekend publications. I suppose that it's because nowadays we get news from our mobile devices. So that's the main thing. But sometimes I feel that even if the news, that headline would be on my screen, I would call it a clickbait headline. And I would probably then just scroll past it, and because it's not telling me, it's not giving me much information, and I just feel that I would call that a clickbait, and I find it silly that because sometimes you will even think that, oh, okay, have they given cancer a race now? Because it seems like everything is getting a race anyway. I mean, people are deciding, oh, this one is a black thing, oh, this one is a white thing, and all that. And as a black person just watching some conversations, I just find them ridiculous. And but then, as Kantan was saying, we are for free expression. So we're not gonna go like Jackson Timber and say, don't buy City Press, don't buy. no, we are matured people. And it's just interesting, though.
Comment from Ernst Kruger says, great point, Unati principles are much more important than optics. Tallulah Moon wants to know, but is Parliament ready for this? Well, I guess that we're going to find out.
Yeah.
Gopalong Lakoto says, listen to you guys argue is refreshing. Wouldn't be surprised if the EFF and ELF are echo chambers. Absolutely right. I'd like to think that we argue all the time among us, but the thing that pulls us together are our principles. And certainly when we got into this thing, it was on the understanding that we were going to continue doing that because that's our makeup. And we'd like to think that that should become the business model for the way in which politics is conducted as a whole.
Absolutely.
I agree completely, Canson.
So I actually want to ask a question to all of you, Duncan first, if I may. So the Freedom Front Plus don't want BLF on the ballot because they say that the IEC rule states that political parties must be non-racial. I personally disagree with that rule. I think people, or political parties rather, should be as bigoted and racial as the founders or the NEC of those parties want to be. And I don't think being racial should disqualify a party from being on the ballot. Duncan and then Canton and Unati, what are your thoughts on that reasoning?
I agree with you completely. I think it would be a suppression of democracy not to allow them onto the ballot.
And yeah, absolutely correct, Roman. And I would really rather have them out there and testing their viewpoints at the ballot box because, hey, that's what we're doing. And on the assumption that if people find our opinions disreputable enough, then they would probably end up not voting for us as well. Just again from the comment line, Benita says, please don't make the mistake to think all Afrikaners are white supremacists. Kaplanda is an idiot who likes to stir things up. I think, Benita, if you take a look at the composition of our party, we certainly, it would not make any sense for us to assume that the couple of Afrikaans speakers we have in our midst happen to be white supremacists. So,
and this is a very important point about individual autonomy. We care about individuals, not groups. So the way an individual is and the strength of their character determines how we behave towards them, irrespective of whatever, of race, color or creed. That's why individual rights are so important. So you judge people individually, not as a collective.
And I think, Ramon and Canton, I think this discussion we're having today is so important. And the fact that we're doing it in public just shows that, we are going to have disagreements on issues from time to time, and we're not going to see things exactly the same way. But where that happens, we're prepared to talk about it in public and argue out the points. And I don't think there's another political party in South Africa that does that.
I tend to agree with you, Duncan. Sorry, Nati, go ahead.
And back to the BLF, should the BLF be on the ballot paper or not? Most of us come from the business background, and I'll say that let's put it out there and leave it to the market. That would be our voters. And then the voters will decide if they want a South Africa with the likes of BLF in parliament and all that. And we cannot control that if we are really for freedom. So I support that they should be there, and we are already there. And I mean, people think differently about things. And yesterday I was I spoke on Power FM with him, and he was before I was given a chance. And from what I was listening, he was being himself, obviously. And it's a free country, and the voters will decide if they want to associate with him or not, and they will do the same with us and with all other parties. So yeah, let's leave it out there to the voters.
David Fourie has a question. Do you think there are any topics that you would consider not worthy of debate, like a debate on your principles? No, we discuss our principles all the time. I think we just don't debate them at the same level because it's the foundation of what we do. But we do explain them to people at almost every conceivable opportunity.
Yeah, I wouldn't debate for example, Holocaust denialism, because I think that's a very fanciful way of saying that history did not exist and all the evidence is fake. It's like sort of debating a flat earther or an anti-vaxxer. It's not a debate. They're just there to irritate you and then carry on with their lives. It's not. They don't do that in good faith, in my opinion. So those are the sort of things I wouldn't debate, but not because I'm against free speech, but because the topic is one that is not advancing South Africa going to work in any meaningful way. It's a small echo chamber that wants to gain a bit of a what do you call it? A bit of fame.
That's absolutely right.
For
example, I was recently trolled by an anti-vaxxer on Twitter, who keeps insisting that I should be debating the merits of being an anti-vaxxer. And again, it's one of those topics like Holocaust denialism, which is just, void on the basis of stupidity. And I'm very happy to say up front that I'm not going to go and engage in that particular direction. Vaccines save lives,
By the same token, the question then arises whether the same rules should apply when talking to far-right racists.
Duncan, I think you're going to have to explain what you meant by that, because I didn't get it.
So what I'm suggesting is that if you're talking to a Holocaust denialist or an anti-vaxxer, it's very unlikely that you're going to change their minds. Is it not by the same token? Is it not the same that if you're talking to a far-right racist, that you're not going to change their mind on issues?
No, that's a fair comment. And look, my approach to that really is that I'm not prepared to engage with a troll on Twitter on a one-on-one basis. But if this anti-vaxxer happens to have a podcast and invites me onto the podcast, and I have the opportunity to speak to the anti-vaxxers flock, for want of a better word, rest assured I will be there in a flash, because vaccines save lives, and I want to get that message out to as many people as possible. I've worked with Rotary for more than a decade now, and one of our biggest global programs is to push for vaccination of people from polio. And we are close to eradicating polio. I don't think people understand how significant this is at a global level. This is a disease. When I was growing up, there used to be kids in my class who were crippled from polio. And now that we have an opportunity to be able to completely eradicate this disease, just a very simple process of oral vaccination administered when people are kids. Am I going to want to be part of a discussion where I'm speaking about that? Absolutely, I'll be there in the flesh. So Duncan, that's basically my response. A one-on-one conversation with a person who's a racist, no, I'm not going to waste my time. But hop onto their platform and talk to other people, sure.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, Duncan. I sort of see the similarities, and your question is pertinent. I am glad to speak to people about political issues rather than specific scientific or historical issues. So, for example, if an anti-vaxxer had to have me on a debate somewhere, I would probably lose that debate, because I'm not a scientist. I understand how vaccines work. I understand that they're effective. But in terms of the details, I don't know enough. I'm very happy to admit that. So they would probably win that debate if there was no sort of moderator on hand. But in the debate I took part in, we discussed political issues in South Africa specifically. And that is the space in which I move around. And by going onto their platform where there's hundreds of people or thousands of people watching, it's well worth my time to influence the people on the show itself, which I think I did to some degree, but also the comments became a lot more, let's say, less negative towards my positions than at the start.
Well, I suppose if you can influence people to change their views, then it makes sense. And if the platform provides enough viewership or listenership, then maybe there's an argument that can be made there, provided you go in and attack their positions where they don't agree with ours.
Just a couple of last questions that I'd like to get in, because we're at the end of our half hour. Let's have a quick look at this. Gary Meyer says, what are your thoughts on blocking people you disagree with on Twitter And Alex follows up by saying, isn't blocking someone on Twitter basically the same as walking away from a physical conversation? Well, from my side, immediately after I started, after the party was announced, I went onto Twitter and unblocked every single person that I had blocked, because I think it's important that as a person who's playing in the public space, that your views don't be shut off from other people. So certainly at that level, but I do mute people. So
I was about to say, muting is a very useful tool on Twitter.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was the one question. I don't know if you guys want to climb in on that.
Well,
I have blocked. I have blocked not people who I find like they are disagreeing with my position on anything, but people who attack me. I mean, if someone swears at me or calls me the ugliest names instead of engaging with what I'm saying, I suppose it also depends on what mood was I in at that point. Was I stressed about something? Because sometimes I'll just ignore them, but there are times that I'll press that block button. But I think I've muted more than I have blocked people. And yeah.
Question from Dale Sparrow, who says, "How will you settle an important argument with empirical truth when other politicians are like anti-vaxxers, such as farming and infrastructure plans?" Anyone want to pick that up?
Well, you have to humiliate them in public. It's that simple. With good argument, that's how it's done. Unfortunately, that's done with a lot of nonsense. Like Donald Trump did that to his Republican opponents by not necessarily being truthful himself. He managed to craft messages that humiliated opponents. If you manage to craft messages where the overwhelming response is a positive one for you and a negative one for your opponent will feel like he's in the wrong. And that hasn't happened in Parliament for a very long time. It's about micro details as opposed to the greater principles of each different party. It's almost like what has happened in Parliament is almost like a popularity contest between various brands, i.e. political parties. So if you come in there with truth, with data, with evidence, especially like our plan to help solve pit toilets in schools, anyone who disagrees with us will either have to A, have a better solution, which I don't think they'll have, or B, fundamentally disagree with solving the problem in first hand. And that is the way that we can really get people to understand that the opposition maybe don't want to solve issues. They're just there to grandstand, and that's it. So it will be very obvious to see how well we do based on that.
Okay, just a final question that I'd like to just call up. Sorry, Duncan, do you want to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, you come to Parliament with fact-based positions. You be logical about it. You don't get emotional, which many MPs seem to do. And I think in that way you position yourself above the noise, above the fray. And I think it's not necessary to be uncivil or to get into a slanging match with others in a Parliament. And I think there's a way of doing it that's going to impress voters and impress the public.
All right, and so I'd like to wrap up with the last question, which was, are we likely to see purple cow T-shirts in Parliament? I don't know about the T-shirts being my dress code.
Purple overalls.
I certainly don't think that, I think most people who know me know that I'm nearly always dressed in a black T-shirt and black jeans, and which really saves my having to think about what I'm wearing the following day. Roman tends to be quite a snappy dresser. Duncan, I don't get to see much of you face to face, so I can't really speak for you.
If it's the weekends, I'm in shorts, but I think
Duncan,
maybe we can.
If you're in shorts, I will disown you, Duncan.
Well, you know those you know those what do you call them? Those hats or those caps that blue ball supporters wear with the horns on top. Maybe that's an option for Parliament.
All right. Okay. All right, guys. I think at that point, let's. Oh, by the way, Duncan, Renee McLeod says that that's Duncan is a snappy dresser. All right, well done.
That's my wife. Thank you.
Yeah, I worked that out for the last minute. All right. Okay, guys. I think let's call it at this point. We've gone 6 minutes over, but yeah, to people out there, this broadcast will be up. So please feel free to point people in this direction. Once again, I think all of us understand that some people get uncomfortable with the idea of unfettered free speech, but we'd rather that you hear it from us now up front, rather than us getting into Parliament, and then you're turning around and saying, but we had no idea that you guys were like this. Well, we are like this, and we hope you'll get used to it and like it.
Get used to it.
Any last words from you guys?
And just one thing for me, I think Nelson Mandela was the best person he had the capability of reaching out to people. I'm sure in his party there were people who were like, how could you speak to those people? But he had that ability to reach out to people with different views. So I take courage in that as we all walk into this new territory in our lives. We stand for free speech, and that's a principle we want to stand by and carry through, and hoping that will inspire more people to speak out. And I mean, just people should be who they are and not be afraid that if I said this, I might be labeled that. So if you think the same way that we do, and if you also want to challenge us, feel free to do that. But we won't stand down in protecting free speech. That's what we're up for. And we hope that will inspire more people to vote the Purple Cow.
Unati's getting really good at this political speech, much better than I am.
All right, guys, let's wrap at that point. Thanks a lot to everyone who tuned in, and we really appreciate it, and all of the comments. And I'm glad the tech worked in our favor this time. 4 of us at one go. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
All right. Bye.